Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of our luxury hotel series. And I'm thrilled to bring you a conversation with a dear friend of mine, Stuart Greif, who I'm going to bring in a moment. And the first question I have to ask him is how much grief the last name Greif has given him over the years, because even when I get introduced to other people, people are like, "Oh, you know Stephen Greif?" And I was like, "No, it's Stuart Greif." First
You
of all,
got both
that's no
names wrong
Stephen.
now.
That's your other call sign. But yeah, Stuart Greif is a dear friend of mine. He's also, very importantly, the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at Forbes Travel Guide. And he has not only a very important role in the industry, he was key to bringing us in, as you would have heard over the last 2 episodes, to the Forbes Travel Guide conference, first in Las Vegas and then last year in Monaco. And so it really opened up the Travel Trends audience to hospitality. So I owe him a huge amount of credit for bringing us into that space. But him and I worked together for many years before. He was with a startup called Amperity, and before that with Microsoft. He was a senior executive with JD Power. He worked for Accenture for many years. So he has a real depth in the technology space, in hospitality, and then also now with the cross-section of guest experience. And so I'm thrilled that he's agreed to join us. This is his first time on the Travel Trends podcast. He's been part of Spotlight episodes. He's been part of our AI Summit for the last 2 years. But Stuart, you finally get your moment on the Travel Trends podcast. Welcome.
Yes, and let me start out with a couple things. First of all, no grief with Grafe. That was my slogan for student body president back in high school. No grief with Grafe. Professionally, when people understandably mispronounce my name or autocorrect corrects it to the misspelling, I often say I've been called worse and probably deserved it most times, so I'll take it. That's fine. And then, in addition to our summit, as you know, Dan and I met up at ITB Berlin. So I had 2 straight exhilarating weeks in Europe, plus 9 hours from home. Finally, at the end, I get to the airport. I'm going to have a little peace and quiet, some downtime to decompress and process. And who shows up at the gate but Dan? So, and then what happens? Oh, out of everybody in this world I could be seated next to on my way home from 2 weeks and plus 9 hours and 20-hour days, it's a podcast host. Oh my gosh. But actually, it was a wonderful serendipitous moment. Dan and I got some time to catch up, which was wonderful.
And I didn't know this was racing through Stuart's mind, and you'll see we'll actually have our producer bring up this camera image, because we're standing in the line and we both realize we're in row 7. We're like, no way, we're sitting next to each other. And so he takes a picture, and I had no idea he was hamming it up for the camera. So I'm looking all giddy and excited. Yep. And I did the same thing when we got on the plane, and I thought we were both super excited to be with each other. And then he makes this post about the fact he's got stuck next to me, and
it's all for effect. Anyone who knows me knows that we're not curing cancer. We're in the hospitality industry, most times giving joy and happiness and memories. Sometimes people when they're at their worst and need comfort and solace, but so let's have fun while we're doing it. So,
and my response to Stuart, for many of you that might have actually seen this, because I got a few thousand impressions, was I said, welcome to the Travel Trends podcast, Stuart. Let's start with your childhood and work forward and see how quickly our listeners fall asleep. And so,
yeah, I was going to say,
now we can put that to the test today. No, we're not going to start with his childhood, but we are going to start with a bit of background. So I do want our listeners to have a better understanding of how you've ended up in the hospitality space, and specifically with this fantastic role at Forbes Travel Guide that you're so perfectly suited for. But tell everyone about your background in technology and then hospitality as well, Stuart.
Yeah, my route was rather circuitous relative to most folks. Growing up, coming out of school, I wanted a broad exposure to business. I got at the time into what was Andersen Consulting, now Accenture. Technology was transforming the world at that time the way AI is now. And so I wanted a broad exposure. I didn't know what I didn't know. So I wound up working across a lot of different industries. But as a byproduct, I was living out of hotels, traveling out of town 4 or 5 days a week. And I actually lived out of a hotel in Midtown Manhattan for 18 months in a 22-month period, 5-6 days a week, and actually wound up loving the staff, and probably a little too much, dated in a way that was probably more inappropriate for them than for me, but also became good friends. And in fact, the general secretary for Clay Door, Barack, was a concierge at that hotel now almost 30 years ago when we first met and reconnected in recent years. So that really sparked this sense of this feeling of hospitality. It took me a little bit later. I went to business school and came back and worked for a company that had a lot of different interests. And I received some global experience, again, living out of hotels often when I traveled. But then once we acquired JD Power, in addition to some corporate functions, I took over global travel and hospitality. And I was working with luxury players in Dubai all the way down to, Motel 6 in the US, and really had a broad exposure to the industry. And since then, it led to many years at JD Power, Microsoft, and Parity, the unicorn startup, now Forbes Travel Guide, and doing a lot in the industry. I'm just so passionate about what we do.
Fantastic. And I know you're such a super connector and you're an ally for women in diversity and travel. And it's one of the things that came up on our episode last week that you had inspired. And I just want to add one additional bit of context when you think about your role and involvement with female executives and promoting female leadership in the travel industry, and also your work across startups as well. So the startup that has kindly sponsored this series is GuestOS.ai that you've heard of. Yeah, exactly. That's why I wanted to make the connection now. You're a huge fan of Jesse Fisher as well. And I just wanted to acknowledge Jesse because it's amazing to see how far the team has come in the last 2 years, from many people in the industry continuing to lift them up, and the success trajectory they're on now with luxury hotels in particular. And so for those of you who are interested in learning a bit more about GuestOS, who are sponsoring the luxury hotel series, their whole focus is they've developed a multilingual AI concierge that was built by hoteliers specifically for hotels, because Jesse's whole background growing up in Yosemite with their parents owning hotels, they literally built this system for their own purposes and realized there was so much benefit for hotels nationwide and now internationally. So it handles guest calls, messages 24/7, keeps everything consistent in your brand voice. We use this for our event with our character that we call Jet. And so you can call in and ask for information about our AI summit, for example. But really, it does the thing that is so important, which is makes the experiences really stand out at a property. And so if you're in hospitality, definitely check out guestos.ai. And thanks again to Jesse and the team.
Yeah, Jesse, and the technology it's extremely empathetic. I want Jesse to continue in hospitality, but I'm like, please God, I could deal with, my cable company and my phone company having a little less human support, overseas with no escalation, versus an empathetic AI that, actually can get my answer and take care of it quickly without long queues or escalations or an inability to actually resolve something. And the beauty is, once it's set, until you change something, it's correct. And when it can't answer something yet, it goes to a human. And at some point that can be automated. I think, luxury will adopt after something's become mass market appropriate. So texting's a good example. Once there's a point when a text came in, you're like, what the H, this is an intrusion. How dare you send me a message? And then we quickly realize it's convenience. You're in a hotel and your partner's sleeping and you want to be able to call downstairs. It's early morning. You can send a text, or you don't feel like getting dressed and going downstairs. Or you're in a business meeting and you can't, you realize you don't have a dinner reservation for your team, and you can text and do it asynchronously. So I think many technologies, not all of them, will get proven out and perfected at the mass market. And then gradually there'll be initially edge use cases. So a luxury hotel may not have a concierge at 2 a.m. Well, is having somewhere better than others? Or you may suddenly get inundated with a whole bunch of check-ins at the same time. Is it better to have an empathetic AI help address some of that versus the phone just ringing or people on hold for 5-10 minutes, which at luxury does not go well. So I think, over time, there will be scenarios, and long term, luxury will adopt it. It doesn't replace a human in the loop and human connection, the importance at luxury, but neither did texting or an app, right? Most even luxury hospitality have apps, right? So I think over time, as technology evolves and innovation happens, there's kind of an adoption curve of where it takes root most robustly. So for example, contact centers, you see Wyndham handling a huge amount of calls in ways that are better for the guest calling in and reduce costs significantly. I think it was 300 basis points or 3% reduction. And they've got, 20 some agents handling calls. Sometimes people are just calling to say, do you still have the reservation? It's amazing how many people do that. And that can be done seamlessly at economy budget up to mid-scale, for example, where Wyndham primarily plays.
Yeah. And it's one of the things I want to get into in our conversation is, given your role at Forbes Travel Guide, the technology you're seeing and what applies in luxury, because obviously I really respect your opinion. You have just come out of the summit conference as well. We had a lot of highlights shared with us from Emily and Marlene last week, and you were the one that kindly nominated them. And this is where we created this series, given I wasn't able to attend the summit this year. I really wanted to lead off season 7 with the hospitality theme and focusing on luxury hotels, because in all of my time, recently speaking at Virtuoso conferences, the luxury segment continues to grow. But trying to demystify what luxury hotels, what that experience actually is, and why hotels today are succeeding when it comes to their personalization, their service, the technology they use. So I know you can speak widely. Forbes Travel Guide is in 85 countries.
100 plus now. We've grown even in the time since we've spoken last. We've grown.
Amazing. Well, I've learned a lot over the last 2 years, and again, big thanks to you for bringing me in, and actually then for me to get to understand Forbes Travel Guide, the star rating system, the GMs that are so focused on attaining that status. But for all of our listeners that are just coming to understand Forbes Travel Guide, would you mind giving everyone a bit of an overview of the company and what it is you guys do?
Yeah, historically, we were more like Michelin Guide. People were driving around the country looking for a place to stop, where to go. It was very much focused primarily on the consumer and rather tactically. And then our chairman, Jeff, had acquired the company maybe about 15, 20 years ago. And we really shifted to say, how do we support the industry? In other words, how do we help elevate the level of luxury by doing incognito inspections? We have 900 standards across hotel, restaurant, and spa alone. That doesn't even get into cruising or high-end residential or other verticals we play with. And the thing about that is it's not gotcha. It's a matter of being able to understand how you're performing. And 75% of our ratings are service, because you can have a beautiful hotel, but if the service is terrible, right, you're not going to come back. I would also distinguish service from hospitality. So my friend Rick, who used to work for me when I was at JD Power, would tell the story about this wonderful dry cleaner he had. He was the warmest guy. Rick, great to see you. Big hug. How are the kids? He'd remember things week to week. The problem, Rick said, is he was a terrible dry cleaner. So you need hospitality. I'd rather over-index with people in the DNA. But the service, right, those standards of excellence need to be there or it falls down. And actually, a lot of people ask, and I think, Dan, you and I, previously, you raised this as a great question to think about in advance of our conversation was, what's the difference between a 5-star hotel and one that hasn't quite achieved that? And a lot of people think about, all this personalization or over the top stuff. The simple truth is, it's about consistency, consistently delivering that hospitality and service at the highest level for each and every guest, each and every time. And, even luxury hotels are made up of human beings. Somebody has something going on in their personal life or a bad day. And that's why so much about the GMs, the ladies and gentlemen, are doing such an extraordinary job to inspire, to have the right types of people, but also to inspire them and to help them lead. And, it's not a manufacturing line where something slightly comes out of tolerance, you adjust it once. We're human beings. We're providing service. And that takes training and that takes time. And we're also contending, as many have observed, with challenges attracting enough talent to the industry. Part of that's because the industry has grown so much. Like, luxury is going to double in size globally over the next 5 to 6 years. And we need to get an acceleration of the next generation of people. You can't clone a 5-star, GM and have him, around the world just because there's twice as many properties. It's not just the GM, it's the head of rooms or the head of F&B, and it's every level in between coming up. So I think that's actually, I've shared, one of the hidden opportunities and acute needs is to maintain a high level of service and get enough folks inspired and delivering this wonderful industry. Because, we can talk about some of the personalization and all of that as well. Technology helps. But you have to have that foundation first. And that's really the biggest difference between the 5-star and non-5-star luxury hotels. Other ones are doing an amazing job. They're just not doing it quite as frequently, consistently, each and every time throughout the year.
Well, and that's where most people, Forbes Travel Guide is very synonymous with the 5-star rating. Tell us a little bit, because that was the part that I found really fascinating, is how important the 5-star rating is. And Jonathan mentioned to us in our opening episode that when Malcolm came to him with his recommendation, and Malcolm's been on 2 of our Forbes Travel Guide Travel Trends episodes, and it was so cool for me to meet someone I've known for many years in the hospitality industry at a Forbes Travel Guide event, get his backstory as to how important that was for him to earn that certification, and also to convince someone like Jonathan, the group CEO, and now they're expanding it to more hotels because they're, and so tell everyone a little bit more about that 5-star rating, and then also how it's expanded because it's no longer just hotels.
Yeah, so Forbes Travel Guide started in 1958. I wasn't there, my hairline might have been. In 1960, we added the 5th star. Unfortunately, we were smart enough to innovate it, but not enough to trademark it, which is ergo Amazon and everybody else claims 5 stars. But the industry knows. You mentioned John Ryder, who's one of the most incredible Red Carnation hotels, global luxury hospitality leaders in the world. And what they understand is it is a high standard. It's uncompromising. It'd be easier for us to say, well, okay, you told us this, we'll give you a little better thing. But if you have somebody audit you, and you negotiate what it should be and you convince them to kind of increase the score and lower the standard, you're really hurting your own guests and hurting your own prospects, because the better experience someone has, the more they're going to spend on property, the more they're going to recommend, right? The more that helps your brand. So we've been, the independence and integrity has always been a part of that. What's evolved, and as I was starting to share, when we decided to focus more on the industry side about elevating excellence, I think part of it too is sometimes there's a fixation on the stars. So on our main stage at the summit, we had a speaker, Dr. Adwana Koala, who she's amazing, who literally had a slide, it wasn't spelled out in the word, that said F the ratings. And you're like, how would Forbes Travel Guide in Monaco at the summit put a closing speaker who absolutely crushed it? And her point is one we agree with, which is don't chase the output. The stars are a reflection of what you're doing, and these fine ladies and gentlemen, the hard work, and folks like Jonathan and Malcolm, at Hotel 41 and Rubens, and they have the property in Edinburgh. But like that's like what you're doing each and every time. And then the stars are what comes out of it. And that really spawned the question in our history of how do you actually help beyond providing the data, the diagnostics, the feedback, and the ability to benchmark and the standards that lead to that better experience. So it was actually when Steve Wynn in Las Vegas was looking to do luxury, and that seemed heretical. Nobody, people laugh. They're like, nobody's going to like Vegas luxury. Ironically, now it feels like it's all luxury. And at the time, our good friend Shane O'Flaherty, who's now Microsoft's global MD of hospitality and travel, who I worked with when we were 2 of 3 global execs for Microsoft, he was CEO of Mobile Guide when Jeff acquired it, our chairman, and it became Forbes Travel Guide. And Mr. Wynn turned to Shane and said, not how do I buy 5 stars, but he said, I want to create this experience. What do you recommend? What should I invest in? And Shane, very wisely said, look, don't try to do it all at once. Do a hotel within a hotel. And that project that started with Mr. Wynn and the Wynn in Las Vegas, where we still have a very close relationship with Brian Goldbronze and the team globally, is what led to this kind of advisory, consultative training service. We have among the best trainers in the world. I'm not a braggadocious person. They're like the TEDx of the training world. And on top of that, we've expanded into e-learning, because when a trainer's there inspiring you, you need something, bite-sized pieces every day, every week, every month. And we announced this year we're going to extend that to certifications to help support professionals so that they can learn a little bit each day, so they can share that on LinkedIn. So when they look for opportunities, as kind of this opportunity to share where they've been, and the recognition of the skills and talents to achieve at the highest level. But we've also expanded far beyond hotels, restaurants, and spas. I mentioned ocean and river cruising, but we also work with high-end automotive. We work with private clubs, around the world. We work with office buildings. We work with any and every category in retail and fashion that you can think of, that has a hospitality service component. And that's become even more vital because, as we've all seen, hospitality is kind of the thread that unifies just about every service industry, including retail and where there's products, beyond the clienteling in the booth, because it's how you create an emotional connection with your customer. And customers, especially at luxury, also want to live the lifestyle of the brand far beyond the bag or the fashion or the car, right? And that has expanded, I think, us really to, each and every industry that has a human touch point, an element of hospitality and service.
We'll be right back.
In the world of travel, you bring the wow, those extraordinary, scroll-stopping experiences that travelers never forget. And Bokun, they bring the how. As a TripAdvisor company and the #1 booking system across major OTAs, Bokun is the complete booking and channel management solution for extraordinary experiences. From an intuitive website builder to synced availability, Bokun handles the code so you can focus on the guest. Plus, scale your business through Bokun's marketplace, over 2,600 OTAs and resellers. Are you ready to grow without the growing pains? Visit Bokun.io today to start your free 14-day trial. Did you know that over 20% of people who purchase a ticket upgrade to a refundable option when given the choice? By offering Refund Protect, you make it easy for your customers to protect their ticket purchase against emergency circumstances, including illness, injury, accidents, and more. Whether you're an airline, hotel group, tour operator, ticketing platform, OTA, or transport solution, when you partner with Protect Group, your customers get peace of mind and you generate extra revenue. With a Trustpilot score of 4.8 stars and over 31,000 reviews, we treat your customers as our own, earning the highest customer ratings in the industry. To find out more, check out the Protect Group website at protect.group/travel trends. In a world of endless travel options, how do you guarantee quality? The answer is curation, and it's the core of Civitatis, the leading marketplace for global tours and activities. Instead of just more options, their promise is more quality. Their experts handpick the best from over 90,000 activities in 4,000 destinations worldwide, ensuring every tour meets the highest standards of quality, availability, and price. They focus this winning strategy on capturing the world's fastest growing customer market, travelers from Latin America. By connecting these travelers to their global portfolio of experiences in native Spanish or Portuguese, Civitatis creates the powerful customer loyalty your business can count on. Their model is a proven formula for generating massive demand and driving industry-leading conversion. For the travel trade, the message is clear. Partnering with Civitatis is your strategy for capturing the massive outbound Latin American market and turning their growth into your revenue. Visit Civitatis.com for more details.
And now, back to the show. And let's talk about your role specifically, because Forbes Travel Guide is very fortunate to have you in this capacity. And I say that, as someone who's known you for many years before your time there, but also seeing you in the industry throughout the time that you've been at Forbes Travel Guide. And you're such a powerful super connector. Obviously, people have a great affinity for you. So your role in many ways, especially being innovation, I'll see you at the Virtuoso conference. I'll see you at ITB. You're at all the big industry conferences. And you're continuously making strong connections. I know you're involved with Plug and Play, but tell everyone about your executive vice president role at Forbes Travel Guide itself, so that our listeners have a bit better understanding of what it is you do in that role.
Yeah, so I have a broad swath, and it's changed over time. There were kind of three different components. There was during COVID, helping the company navigate that downturn and get in front of things, which I played a leading role along with our CEO Philippe, who's wonderful at the time, our CFO and senior team. There was then the period coming out and trying to help support our clients and everybody stand back up. And then I think there's been this global growth where we've continued to expand. And continue to find ways to add value in support of the ladies and gentlemen in the industry, as well as broadly. So operationally, I lead our client success team. I lead our, and I'll put this in air quotes in a second. We have this Astria, this wonderful Discover Astria platform of curated vendors and suppliers to luxury hotels you should check out. That includes our official brands, which have a deeper kind of involvement in our community. And you can't buy a rating and you can't buy your way into the community. All of it is curated. It has to meet a certain standard. It's not meant to be elitist. It's simply having a high standard because we understand what luxury has to deliver, and it has to fit with the priorities of the industry. So my role, has spanned from strategically where is our growth going in support of our chairman, Jeff, and our CEO, Herman, and their vision for the company and bringing that to the company as a complement and support, and then all the way through execution operationally. I said in quotes, we have Amy Zeller across our, CRM and our client, management area, and Chessa, who actually runs client success. They don't need me day to day. They're extraordinary. And for me to backfill and train so that the people coming behind me, both are women, right? And the Discover Astria is run by Yvonne, who's amazing, and gradually being able to have her more and more entrepreneurially run that, they're more than capable. They're delivering, and so I can play more of a strategic role there. And there's a whole host of initiatives that have changed over time, right? From supporting the industry coming out of COVID to launching new products. I've played a role, in many of them, and it's really whatever Herman may need at a given point in time. So I'm kind of like a Swiss Army knife. And I want to make just one or two other observations that I think are, um, universally applicable to you and your career, whatever your stage is, which is the same way people come up through hotels and they apprentice, if you will, at different battle stations, from ballet and eventually front desk and rooms and F&B, and they're cross-training and they're learning the connective tissue. So eventually when they're in the position of a Malcolm or a Jonathan at a leadership level, they understand how the pieces come together and they've got the connective tissue. My career, we have so many extraordinary leaders, Amanda, Megan, Gina, who've grown up in luxury hospitality, Laurel from kind of the marketing and product. Notice these are all women I've mentioned that are senior leaders. We have a tremendous representation of women at every level, and especially at the executive level. And from director and up, it's 65% plus. It may be even be more from lower levels, and 50% at the executive team level. And so I think the thing is, what I bring is this complement I've always pursued in my career, even though I've changed, and hospitality has been a thread, and I came back to in depth, like, am I learning? Can I add value? Between stretch, too much stretch and you tear a muscle, too little sitting on the couch doing nothing and you're not growing. And at certain times, making calculated risks of taking, bigger risks. Those are the things when I look back professionally and in my personal life were the greatest growth that led to the future position. So there are some people who know, hey, I want to be a CFO or I want marketing. There's nothing wrong with that. Go deep. But, I think any organization you have, you need both. You need the people that are kind of world-class and tremendous in understanding the expertise. We have plenty of folks in luxury hotels and operations that I could spend the rest of my career doing. It would never come close to even touching like 100th of what Herman has, as an example. But what I bring is, how do I complement that? How do I bring, having led strategy, having led P&L, having led operations, having done startup that became a unicorn or a big tech company, how do I bring innovation to that? And then because of that network, I can help connect dots within the company and, to your point, at events outside in ways that unlock value. And I love doing that. Not everything, if you go to an event and you meet somebody and they're talking about, hey, this is what's important, then you meet someone else and you're like, you two should meet. Take the 2 minutes to walk them over and introduce them, or do that by email. Because I think, if you only think transactionally through just your company and what you need right then, you're going to wind up finding that, okay, maybe that works for selling some things, but this is a relationship, long-term business. And for a global industry that's 11% of global GDP, it is an incredibly small world. Your reputation matters, how you treat people, how you engage, and building trust, which is earned over time, not given, is what matters. So don't be transactional. Think more broadly when you meet people, whether at events or as part of your company.
Seeing you in action, you definitely walk the walk, and a lot of people, talk up, but you have been one of the people that I've seen really showcase this continuously. And I know that's one of the things that many people love about you, Stuart. And obviously, and jokingly, I was actually going to start playing a snoring soundtrack just at the end of you talking there, just like as if I'd gone to sleep. But I was like, what you were saying was far too important and meaningful that I was like, I can't end on that.
I actually have recorded myself reading old phone books. Those are where phone numbers used to be, for those too young to remember, and reading the ingredient list off the boxes of cereal boxes. It is a guaranteed insomnia cure. You'll be asleep in 2 to 3 minutes listening to the recording. The irony is, when I'm on stage, I have a different voice that comes out and persona. But yes, master of the monotone. That should be my moniker.
Well, let's talk about that. Because events, not only do you attend events, you're obviously the Forbes Travel Guide, the summit. Now, you brought me in. You've just come back from that in Monaco this year, and as you highlighted, the team, obviously, Jennifer, Amanda, Laurel. I've had a privilege to meet and work with that team, and I can say from my experience, I definitely mentioned this in our last episode, but just for anyone who's just listening to this the first time, we have these two incredible seasons from the Forbes Travel Guide to Summit, inspired by Stuart, but led by Amanda and Jennifer, who we work closely with to guest all of these. And when I was reflecting in putting this together, I took all the transcripts and I analyzed them using ChatGPT to figure out what are some of the insights that came from those conversations, and some that stood out to me that yes, I recall that, that surfaced that I thought was interesting. So I've got a few of those that I'm keen to share with our listeners. But even when I look at the balance, the balance is more like 40% female, and that team was actually, and many of these people not only were the ones that they nominated to be interviewed based on their role and significance in the industry and what they've accomplished, but they were the ones going up for awards at both of the events. And I realized that afterwards, especially in the first year I was in Vegas, I should have been betting on it. I had the list of people I interviewed. I should have known that night as I sat at the table that one after another they were going up to collect awards. So tell us, I guess, first of all, for any of our listeners that are not familiar with the summit, the importance of bringing everyone together, why it became international, moving from Vegas to Monaco, and how successful the second year was you just had.
Yeah, so I think, the summit has become where luxury and travel and hospitality meet globally, and not just hotel or hospitality or travel, but we talked about fashion and jewelry and automotive. We had Bugatti on the stage. They were back this year. We actually had several Bugattis out front. We had CEOs of some of the major jewelry and fashion businesses. We have all sorts of industries represented because hospitality, as I shared, is the thread through everything. And I think part of the reason, if you think about all of the best events, ITB, ILTM, Virtuoso, LE Miami, all around the world, and whatever it is, it's kind of the best elements that everybody loves about a lot of them, that human connection, that community, education, inspiration. But ours isn't focused commercially. And what I mean by that is not an implied criticism of the others. The others, like ILTM, you need buyers and sellers meeting, coming together. But it really is this rare where it's not commercially focused. It's not like, ironically, I think because of that, people are relaxed and they create connection, and business opportunities naturally arise. We have official brands and this curated collection of Astria suppliers called Astria Live that are there as well. But it's not a trade show. And most of the focus is really, I would say, first and foremost for us, it's our ability to give hospitality back to all those giving it each and every day throughout the year. It is incredibly humbling, especially for me who hasn't led hotel operations, to be able to give that back to so many people who have not just given it to myself and my colleagues personally, but who do it, and knowing just how hard that is and how gratifying to be able to say thank you and create in Monaco a luxury market, an immersive experience that is, all of the five senses of sight and sound and experience taking over Hotel de Paris, that never shut down the hotel for a private event before, having Michelin chefs being able to live the environment that the ladies and gentlemen in their guest experience, but instead of them having to be working at it, they can just relax and themselves experience what they put out there and be inspired, and have these new education and speakers talking about what's coming next. For example, Joe Pine and the transformation economy, what happens after experiences. And, he happened to have a new book coming out, which I just happen to have here. This isn't as intended as a plug for Joe, but like each and every speaker of her and his own right, and collectively create this overall kind of inspiration, education. We're celebrating, those leaders. The young concierge of the year, the employee of the year award are like two of the most, I would say, important awards that everyone loves. A standing ovation for the employee of the world, who is a young woman who started in reservations, and really her hospitality has earned her this global recognition where we fly her to the event. I do want to say too, you touched on this, 50% of our speakers this year at the event were women, a full 27%, maybe more, excluding gender, were diverse. That means there are people of color. Our opening keynote happened to be Chris Gardner, happens to be, African American, but, people of different ethnic backgrounds, people LGBTQIA plus, so the representation of our community, our global industry welcomes everyone and serves everyone. And our guests, our leaders, our colleagues, right, around the world are all global. And to me, that's part of hospitality is when people travel, their brains are different. As one of our speakers shared, they're open to kind of learning and engaging in different ways. We want to ensure that our community is represented and reflected in the diversity that exists already. We're one of the most diverse industries globally, and we want to reflect that back. We also want the next generation. We had F1 Academy driver Alba, the fastest girl in the world, who just turned 17 recently and has a 10-year deal with Ferrari, on her stage talking about how she never saw other girls in front of her. Instead of waiting for the system to change, she started a foundation because she wants to be a positive role model for girls in racing. So it's both reflected implicitly, but also explicitly. And myself, Amanda, Herman, and the team, we find extraordinary speakers and talents who also happen to reflect that diversity secondarily, if you will. There's no compromise.
Yeah, no, and that's clear. I was going to say you can mention Joe Pine anytime as well, since not only am I a big fan of his, he's been on our podcast 3 times in the last 7 months. As he said, he's not done any podcasts as frequently as he's done ours because he's really enjoyed the experience. And this is where, I'm very convinced that good people know good people. And when you have Joe Pine go to an event like he did with you, he met Laura Cilio Pavad, who's a great friend of mine, a great supporter of our podcast at Pernod Ricard. She was so excited to be there at Forbes Travel Guide the Summit for the first time this year, and she sent me a picture of her and Joe Pine together, and that was really lovely to see. And so Joe was obviously one of the speakers I've seen, so I know he's a great speaker. The F1 racer was actually one of the people that stood out to me. But what were some of the other standouts from this year? And then I want to get into some of the luxury trends you're seeing in the future of hospitality, but I want to stay on the topic of the summit because so much happens in those few days together. And I still talk about some of the highlights. And in the last episode, I talked about the consultants that we're talking about, solo female travelers, 50 plus, divorced or widowed, using GLP-1. And Emily caught me up that it's now 20% in the US, and it was an updated version of that same talk. So tell us about some of the other sessions that you guys had there and some of the other big takeaways from the conference.
Yeah, that was Allison from PwC talking about the impact of GLP-1s and even the degree to which kind of the foodies have like shifted a subset then to more kind of venture type travel, of getting out and more activity as a result. Chris Gardner is the opening keynote talking about, the dream is free, but the plan will cost you, and that it's important that you need to invest, right, and be tenacious. And his story is so inspiring to begin with. And I think he's got that. I think like you need to record or get a clip of like his laugh, because everybody, it is the most like hearty, heartfelt, unique. It's almost like this embodiment of joy in just his laughter. I mean, we had so many speakers. We had, a world explorer talking about, who's climbed every peak. And of course, he was the first one to show up at our gala black tie dinner. Of course, I joke, I think he was there a little bit early because of part of it. But, what we have is kind of the main stage where there's inspiring, but then people like Joe and Ernst, who is, this amazing, intrepid explorer all over the world, have these breakout sessions. And in fact, we're inviting Dr. Koala back, who gave the closing keynote, to see if she's amenable to do a deeper dive, because people loved, her message. And a lot of it was around this emotional like engagement. Oftentimes, we get so caught up in, the business, which, has become harder, I think, which makes the GMs and their teams even more extraordinary, of trying to manage this industry structure and pressure for profit, experience, right, operations, all of the moving parts. But this notion of caring, Horst Schulze said it last year in Inspire, like, the caring is kind of and I'd say like the hospitable has gotten squeezed out of hospitality from 25 years of cumulative asset light. And I think some of that's coming back. And I think some of what Joe talks about, beyond experiences, people are traveling now, for passion first, location often secondary, and sometimes brand third. It's not a monolith, right? There's still people, you still want to get the picture, or somebody wants to see the Eiffel Tower, but how can hospitality align to support people's passions and what it is that's activating them in a given trip, especially for leisure. Granted, like your business trip, you're coming in late and you're leaving early. You want to be able to be supported in your best business self. That might be a little different depending on the nature of the hotel. But I think, each and every one of these speakers added different elements. And then we get into the breakouts. We had a great one on AI on the main stage with the Future Laboratory and a gentleman who presented there. And then I led an AI session that we had Shannon McCallan, Resorts World Las Vegas, who leads hotel operations. And we had Janet Semenova, BTA advisors, boutique travel advisors, each of whom are probably among the most forward-leaning in tech and innovation, while still understanding the human experience matters at different scale, the scale of Vegas versus the scale of a travel agency. And then we had our good friend Gilad talk about the future. And what was really vitally important to me was that it's good to be inspired up here, but that session was focused on actual use cases. What are people actually doing when it comes to the LLMs and marketing? How are you actually doing? What have you learned? What did you implement? Not necessarily what was the hard ROI always, but like, what is the benefits you've seen and what are you doing in the year ahead? And that is where I think the industry is continuing to go. That's why I love your AI travel trend event every year, because I think being a virtual event allows you to bring the best speakers from all over without deference to geography or schedule constraints, and bring the topics that really matter. So I encourage folks to make sure they look out for that and sign up, because to me, that's one of the best collections of where are we as an industry as we move from like the conceptual and theoretical, which still matter, of where we're going, right? It's great. Claude Cloak and and agents can go in the wild, and this could be bleeding edge, but that's not enterprise grade security. It's not safe. It's not all of these things, but maybe you're seeing the bleeding edge of what will happen in the following years when all of that can get figured out. In the meantime, everybody needs to know, like, what can I do today and how to do it? And I think that's where the industry could really use more support. That's why our session was focused on that.
Yeah, that's great. And obviously, I know you've got a deep expertise in AI, and you've obviously led our sessions the last 2 years at our AI summit on this topic around hospitality, and then also our good friend Shane, who you mentioned. And those sessions are available on our YouTube channel. So just if you want to go back and see Stuart, Shane, or look at the hospitality, and we'll be announcing our event for end of October very shortly. So that'll be coming up. But the one thing with your event, because it's very coincidental they're named the summit, the people that come together for your event, there was so many standouts, and obviously we've produced about 30 different episodes from the 2 seasons, but we finished season 2 with an episode that had Mark Friedland, who Couture Communications, someone who had met over
the
year before. They produced the cards for many years for the Academy Awards, the Oscars, and like their print work is really impressive. So they're an important partner as part of the ecosystem. Jeanette Saya as well, who's obviously an award-winning travel journalist.
Yeah, Jet Set with Jeanette.
Exactly. She's amazing. And then the other person that was their presentation was a huge standout for me, Freddie Morose, who is the founder of Mindstream. And I really intrigued to have him on the podcast because I got a chance to meet his team, and that session they did on stage, like, that was mind blowing for me, where, they brought in someone that had was unable to see, but just based on their ability to hear and play piano, they could pick up any melody, and they brought in the doctor he'd been working with. Yeah. So tell us,
and
what they did this year.
This year they went into kind of the notion of like memory and how certain, visual or sound elements, right, can evoke, the same way certain smells and everything else. And this is what I mean about, like, when you try to define the summit, it defies definition because it's so many of these things. It's this immersive experiential. It's what luxury hospitality is. It's almost like the living embodiment of that. Plus you have this incredible community and human connection at its core, where people have the time and the ability not just to kind of celebrate, which is lovely, and reconnect. A lot of these folks know each other, over the years, but at most other events, like, it's so, focused on like the business of the business that like they don't have that ability to be a guest, to immerse, to be inspired, to have conversations and talk about the things that matter and where we're going. And it doesn't mean every speaker is something everyone's going to agree with every point. In fact, it's also meant to provoke and, things about where is the right balance with AI and luxury, since, it's about human connection, or, so I think those types of things that have made the summit this like, must attend event. And to your point of like all of the interviews you've done, I can't wait to like, we're happy to introduce you to another like, 4 or 5 dozen, because we're just scratching the surface of these amazing leaders around the world across 100 plus countries that we're in, and probably several others that we're not yet, but will be, I'm sure, soon. That, their leadership and their perspective and how things are evolving, is one of the wonderful things. I think part of the reason why luxury, it's not about elitism from my perspective. I've always been driven in my career by curiosity, learning. Is there's the most texture, there's the most density, that whether it's design, whether it's experience with F&B, it represents the highest articulation of that. And so there's so much more going on in terms of hospitality and complexity and just emotional activation that happens, that there's nothing wrong with like a clean hotel and a great, good enough warm breakfast or a place to stay with good Wi-Fi. Like, but like that's different. I think there's a bifurcation. There's nothing wrong with either of lodging and accommodation and what is true experience. And you see experience at boutique hotels where a lot of innovation happens, even in lifestyle hotels. And so I think it's not that it has to be exclusive to the highest price point. It's just that there's a reflection that there's more capacity than for more experientially. And to me, that's more interesting. The other parts of the industry are interesting to me too. Very interesting, but that's where scale and technology will play a more prominent role sooner. I would love for everybody, even economy budget, to have eye contact, a warm smile. You don't need to be a luxury hotel to provide hospitality and service, but it's a little bit easier, but the expectations are also higher of the guest at luxury. A good example is Drury Hotels, which for umpteenth year has won the J.D. Power Award, because for their mid-scale customers, relative to expectation of what they're paying for and the value of a mid-scale hotel, Drury does an extraordinary, Chuck Drury, and then Eric, who leads it for Chuck, of creating that hospitality and that service relative to the price point and what's in a mid-scale hotel. It's not saying you'd confuse going to Drury with going into the Aman in New York, but relative to the expectations, Drury scores just as high in J.D. Power scores as many of the top luxury hotel brands, because they exceed and deliver on that experientially and hospitality.
We'll be right back.
Propellic is the leading full-service travel marketing agency built for how people discover travel today. We help travel brands grow through SEO, paid media, analytics, and AI-driven visibility across search and generative AI platforms like ChatGPT. Recently named to the Inc. 5000 list of fastest-growing companies, Propellic works with leading tour operators, hospitality brands, and destinations worldwide. If your brand cares about demand capture, performance, and winning in the next era of search, Propellic is your partner. Learn more at Propellic.com. Looking for travel that's purposeful and hassle-free? Intrepid Travel, the world's largest adventure travel company, offers over 900 locally led tours across more than 100 countries on every continent. Every journey is designed to connect travelers deeply with people and places, while they take care of the logistics so your clients can focus on the experience, not the details. With small groups and off-the-beaten-path adventures, Intrepid delivers meaningful, immersive, and responsible travel. Explore the world with purpose and ease at intrepidtravel.com. Travel has changed, but many multi-day tour operators are still stuck with spreadsheets and disconnected systems. Today's travelers expect more choice, more flexibility, more unforgettable moments, without the friction. That's where Captio comes in. Built on Salesforce, Captio is a modern platform designed specifically for multi-day tour operators. From tailor-made trips to group tours, from rail to river to cruise, we bring your itineraries, bookings, payments, and operations together in one seamless system. With automation, real-time inventory, and supplier integrations, we make complex travel simple, so you can focus on what you do best. Serve travelers, not spreadsheets. Visit Captio.com to learn more.
And now, back to the show. Now, the event itself is invite only, and I did hear from Emily and Marlene that you're back in Monaco next year. So for those people who are listening to this, and then I want to get into some of the the trends for luxury hospitality in 2026. But just to finish off on the Forbes Travel Guide Summit, as I understand it, 2027 will be back in Monaco. Any other final takeaways that would be worth letting everyone know, especially if they want to potentially partner with the team for 2027?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the exciting things for us is just like our clients, you're like, wow, we did this. And then the next day you're like, oh, how are we going to top ourselves next year? And the exciting thing is, I mean, that's what the ladies and gentlemen need to do each and every day with guests that come back and keep things fresh and exciting and think about different ways to build on what you know about it. So we learn, we get feedback, we learn from each event. I think after this year, a lot really came together amazingly. And I know Amanda and I have already spoken privately about some themes for next year. I've already, shared about a dozen or 24 potential speakers and topics and things. I don't want to give much away. And ultimately Herman, right, and Amanda, who leads the program for us, I'm just a kind of conduit and funnel of taking, the opportunity from all the different folks I see and hear and seeing the trends. And it'll evolve. I mean, obviously closer to the event, some things are going to matter a little differently, than maybe right now. But thematically, we're excited. There's opportunities to submit people for speakers. What we don't really have is like this kind of paid promotional, get somebody on the stage, talk about your product. Like we even our brands that are part of this curation, it's not a selling event. It's relationship. It's experiential. It's informational. So for us, if you are one of our clients or engage with us, that's obviously an opportunity because there's a focus on that. If you have a point of view that's unique, that and we try. There are some speakers. Sometimes I feel badly if I inadvertently wound friends. Like if we had the same people each and every year, it wouldn't be as fresh. There wouldn't be as new perspectives. And so by definition, we tend to rotate and seek additional perspectives, even with people that have great perspectives we love or may have presented once or twice before. That's not meant to disparage or say, oh, you can't, come next year. I should also mention we do a tremendous amount of work with like custom standards in these other industries, which my colleague Sylvia leads. And so even if you're not in hospitality, you're not luxury, we still work with other brands. We have e-learning that works that isn't just luxury. So sometimes I think there's a mistaken assumption that everything's luxury. We take what we know across at the leading edge of luxury across 100+ countries and all sorts of industries, but then we adapt and adjust that based on each client's specific unique needs and the space they play in. And oftentimes that's also bringing an element that isn't luxury, products or services or brands to be able to provide that to help them elevate, where they are.
That's great. And to finish off, and one of the things I want to make sure that we cover is the key trends in luxury hospitality as you've seen them both from the summit this year as well as all of the hospitality brands you work across. And just as a segue to that, what I wanted to share with our listeners that we will likely put into a blog post as part of this series was taking all of those insights from those conversations. I put together the top 5 insights on luxury hospitality, and I'm just going to share these now because some of them obviously will maybe consistent with what you're seeing, Stuart. So some of them might be underscored, and then others might be new to enter into the consideration set. But the first one was culture is the foundation of 5-star hospitality. And that really luxury hospitality isn't built on a checklist, it's built on culture. And the most successful hotels embed that service into every layer of the organization, from the leadership to the frontline teams. And that really luxury hospitality is a mindset, not a manual, which is literally what you were referring to when you talked about closing the conference. It was not about the checklist, it's about a culture. So that was the number one. Number 2 was employee experience powers guest experience. And one of the terms that Stuart continually used throughout this interview that I found really interesting was ladies and gentlemen. And actually, I learned that from Mark Langevin. And when I was interviewing him, the number of GMs that refer to ladies and gentlemen are much more professional, polite. And so I heard from every leader, great teams are what create great guest experiences. So investing in training, career growth, and prioritizing building strong teams, that if you take care of your team, they'll take care of your guests.
None of us can give great hospitality to other people when we don't feel taken care of. You need to put your oxygen mask on first before you can take care of other people. And so I think, great leaders, the ladies and gentlemen harkens back to Horst Schulze, the, famous, co-founder of Ritz-Carlton, who also, launched Capella, which is another amazing brand, and the terminology. And there's some that may have a more contemporary view, but, we're using ladies and gentlemen, maybe they have a different cultural or brand sensibility. To me, what it reflects is not necessarily everyone has to call ladies and gentlemen, but it's that notion of treating the colleagues as important and as well as you treat guests. It doesn't mean that you put like the colleagues on top of or above the, some people will say, well, in service to guests, you're not like an equal to the guests you're serving. I think that loses the script. To me, this notion of, and great leaders like Jonathan Raggart, understand. I remember the first time I met with him and read Carnation a number of years ago, the adulation, genuine warmth. I see it with Anna at the Broadmoor, which is the longest continuous 5-star hotel going back, to 1960 when we invented it. And I strongly suspect, and Anna wasn't there back then, just to be clear, but I strongly suspect before we had the 5th star, that property was delivering, what we would have called 5 and rated 5-star service. And when she walked, I always ask for a back of house tour. If you're ever going to a property, ask for a back of house tour. You can feel things when you walk on a property almost instantly, the attenuation to detail, how colleagues interact with each other, the guest dynamic, etc. But ask somebody to do a back of house tour, and man, the love that Anne had, walking around, like not just like family, like she is the culture, like embodied in a person, and it takes nothing away from her boss. He'd tell you, and I got to see him. He's wonderful. What they do at the Broadmoor. The degree to which that reflects how you treat people, right? Some of which is policies, but a lot of which is personality and caring and empathy and flexibility. I think when you think about those things, you think about yourself in your own life. And when you're really performing and inspired, you feel supported, you feel psychic safety, you feel empowered, right? You don't feel belittled, you don't feel micromanaged, you don't feel denigrated. And that, to me, I think when we see things like Noma in the press, Noma, excuse me, the chef that was physically and emotionally abusive, there is this, leading from light, as opposed to leading from this darkness of yes, chef, and that kind of culture that I think is changing. That I think is a good thing for our industry, healthy, and for the next generation of leaders for whom that's vitally important, emotional well-being. And you have to understand the current generation's different. You're dealing with multiple generations and different sensibilities from a guest and when and how they want to be engaged. Just as when we went from traditional, more formal luxury to more authentic luxury that Alan Firstman and Montage really pioneered. We're also dealing with that multi-generational shift, both from a guest-facing, but also from a colleague-facing, in how younger people think about, careers, jobs, emotional well-being, how they're treated, how they're inspired. And that can be confounding, right? That can be frustrating because, we're all, well, back in my day. But, if you have that approach, you might be right, but it's going to wind up leading to you not having much of a business because you can't attract top talent if you're not treating them in ways just like speaking a different language or different cultural sensibilities. You need to adapt your approach, I think. And that was part of the conversation, one of the most well-attended parts of our summit this past year.
Well, and clearly how you treat people is how they're going to treat their guests. And so the third for this list, and I'm only going to mention one more and hand it back to you, Stuart, is that emotional connection is the new luxury. So shifting a transactional to personal, guests remember how they feel more than what they receive. And it's not about the amenities. It's about those personalized touches, anticipating preferences, building relationships. That ultimately is what drives loyalty. And guests return to a hotel based on how it makes them feel. And so if the staff feels like they're walking around on eggshells, you'll sense that as a guest. So and then the last one, and this is where it's a perfect segue to you, was that the future of luxury blends high tech, high touch, and responsibility. And that technology should enhance, not replace. human service so that the best hotels are removing friction while still creating meaningful, memorable, and responsible guest experiences. And so this whole idea of human, conscious. So tell us, Stuart, obviously that I'm sure is still a major theme for 26, but what are the standouts for you?
Yeah, I'll share from the AI breakout. So I shared some data. I spoke at the Luxury Roundtable. Our good friend Mickey Elam Khan runs in New York City. You should check out Luxury Roundtable. They've got some great events. And I spoke there alongside, so I represented Forbes Travel Guide. We had McKinsey, we had UBS Wealth, and a lot of others at Luxury speaking, and a lot of great content. McKinsey shared some slides that said, in the LLM, and there's a lot of information and actually too much misinformation on agentic search. In other words, SEO has to continue being done, but how am I going to show up in the LLM search, especially if somebody's only going to get maybe a subset of recommendations? And clearly, as you have AI summaries, even on Google, right? If you look at Gemini, it reduces the clicks through, right? Because people get it. But only 20% or less of how you're showing up in the LLMs, right? And this is recent McKinsey data, is based on the things that you need to do. So I'm not saying you don't have to do this, but like, is my site readable? Do I, have, my marketing collateral? Is it, reflected in a way, the LMs, the things I control? But more than 80% is reputational. It's the things you don't control digitally. Things of what's your reputation? How are people talking to you? Blog sites, rating sites. And I did something and I said, well, it's a little self-serving. And I said, okay, it's a lot self-serving. We're asked the question, like, where can I find the best luxury hotels and their ratings? And I asked ChatGPT in this case. I did it a year ago, and I did it 3 days before the summit. It said Forbes Travel Guide, and it talked about our service orientation and about being the most rigorous and most trusted and why it is. Your reputation matters. And the irony of this is ultimately, what's your reputation built on? Like, yeah, if you try to put a thumb on the scale or have people, the LLMs are going to see through that. Each LLM that's dominant today, McKinsey data showed 4 of them, have different sources. That's going to evolve over time. Google search, there were times early on when like suddenly they would change something in the algorithm that made it better, and suddenly you disappeared for a period of panic until it matured, and then the variability was a lot less. Well, that'll change, but most of the models have the same thing, which is, ultimately you need to do 2 things, and this is where we're so excited to support the industry, because ultimately, what is that ground truth of what you said, Dan, of how do you feel when you're on the property? What is the operational experience? Because in our industry, the rubber meets the road the moment you step on a property. The experience starts before that. But when you do it, if you are delivering exceptional service consistently, if you're then, yes, going above and beyond and doing the personalization, ultimately, and if you're differentiated, like have a point of view, a friend to everyone is a friend to no one, I think was a Socrates quote, which means like, if you're trying to appeal to everyone and you're so bland, you're not really going to stand out. So how are you differentiating as a property? What are the unique things that are there? And I'll give you a specific example of that. Our ratings reflect that because it is a reflection of that service, which is why Forbes Travel Guide was #1 in that list as far as being, the most rigorous, trustworthy, dependable source when it comes to luxury hotels. And then obviously the work we do with other clients, we apply that expertise. My friend Guillaume Benizek, who ran the Ritz-Carlton in Toronto at a 5-star level, and then joined the global brand team for Ritz-Carlton Reserve under Tina Edmondson's wonderful leadership. And this isn't to bias to Ritz-Carlton versus, every other luxury hotel brand. I'm just using this as an example. They came up with these 5 signature experiences at each property, but it wasn't random. It was what is unique to the property, that place, authentically. Are there craft people there where there's a unique relationship and something they do with culturally that makes sense for this? People say authentic experiences. They're curated, but they're curated to feel authentic, to be immersive, to be engaging, to expand yourself in a way that really differentiated each one of the properties as a start. I don't mean the only thing. This is just one small example of saying, like, how do I stand out? Because when there's only 3 or 5 recommendations that come back for something I'm looking for, well, if you're a low cost player, there's probably room for only, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 results, because low cost is low cost. It's undifferentiated, it's price. But if you're differentiated, I'm probably going to hew and bias more towards the subset of one. So how are you going to show up? And ultimately, the training of your staff, the culture, the differentiation, and how you deliver excellence is going to what makes you stand out. Otherwise, if you're somewhere in the middle and you're just okay enough, you still have a business if you're in a good location or part of a big brand, but are you really going to stand out in ways that people are looking for and show up in that subset of results in the future? I think it's going to be a lot harder.
For sure. And yeah, that's certainly a big focus area for you, I know, is the AI and technology. In terms of some of the overall trends you're seeing, you mentioned about the growth rates of luxury travel over the next 5 years, and that's where I ultimately want to finish this conversation. Is looking at the future of luxury hospitality and how bright that is, even though we are now in challenging times again, given the developments in the Middle East and geopolitics, and so there's, and I know you've been a big advocate for making sure that the hoteliers that couldn't travel from the Middle East this year, and Dubai and Saudi Arabia. I mean, obviously that region now is incredibly challenged and had such a bright future in luxury hospitality. And so but tell us a little bit about how you do see the future of luxury hospitality, and ultimately what keeps you motivated and so positive and upbeat. I know, because I feel it when I'm at an event like that the human connection, and so you walk away feeling so empowered and inspired.
Yeah. There are all these changes, all these trends, and you can probably do like 150 different trends or like micro trends, and you could bucket them. You could probably have Chat GPT or other LLMs, and all of them are true. This notion of how can AI enable productivity to free folks up to focus more? Can we use that to do better personalization? Abra Hospitality is a great example of a startup that's bridging the last mile of luxury hospitality and experience delivery, putting it at the fingertips instead of boards and trying to find information in 10 different systems. You can talk about this notion of traveling for passion and purpose and things that we've talked about, or transformation. So I think there's so many things. Longevity and well-being. I'm speaking at a summit in Cologne, Germany with FIBO that Judith Cartwright of award-winning Black Coral Consulting is leading, and she used to be Kerzner's global head of SVP and distribution. And a lot of things, I think, around longevity and well-being that right now are ultra luxury. At some point, price points and some of that will kind of come down to mass adoption while people are going up. So for me, I think about a quote, and this is one of the senior executives at Hermes, the very high-end ultra luxury brand that many people growing up in my native language of New Jersey, we would say Hermes, but so the French brand, right? Hermes said, we have to constantly change in order to remain the same. How do you take a heritage brand that has that continuity and that consistency of that luxury, that high end, all of that, and in order to stay the same, the executive remarked that they have to constantly change and innovate, and that is, I think, the essence of luxury hospitality. Human connection has to remain at the center. Guest tastes change, trends come and go, different things come in and out, innovation, experiential, all of that. Everybody has to innovate the game. And in social media, it's hard because surprise and delight used to be a wonderful thing. Now people can discover just about everything as soon as you launch it. Somebody made a video of it, right, and posted it online for the world to see. So I think the more is that the thing that, like, remaining the same is, how do I make each and every guest feel special? And that may be different depending on the trip and context. You're not going to be able to do everything in the entire experience each and every time at every stuff. So you got to kind of pick and choose. And how do you do that overall? And a lot of that is just the engaging hospitality. Like I said, it's consistently, we know it when we feel it, right? We know it when you feel like somebody's really warm and engaging, even if they're just like asking if you'd like another cup of coffee. You close your eyes and I'm like, how can I help you? How can I help you? How can I help you? Right? Like I want to help you. I'm indifferent, and like, you're bothering me, interrupting my day by me trying to serve you. So we're human beings. There's a lot that's intuitive, and it comes down to, I think, ironically, even with technology, the focus still, the North Star is that. And if you lose that in pursuit of technology innovation, it may be fair enough, different at certain segment scales where it's more accommodation and lodging. I'm not delighting in it. Or as a business model, it's more transactional than relationship. But as you get up to luxury, I think that's going to constantly evolve. And I do see that, we have to each and every year constantly change in order to remain the same. I love that. I think that's a perfect way to end.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Stuart. I was thrilled to finally have you on the podcast, and we're going to continue to do more collaborations together, especially as we focus on hospitality as we continue with Travel Trends podcast. And so I want to say thank you so much for bringing us into this space, for being such an advocate for what we're doing with Travel Trends podcast right from the very beginning, and the virtuoso in those rooms, meeting people like Jessica Blotter from Kind Traveler, some of these organizations that you've been involved in, and giving them a voice and an opportunity. And so I've loved all those collaborations. I'm thrilled that we finally made this happen, and I'm looking forward to more. But let's make sure any of our listeners that are just coming to know you, that if they want to reach out on LinkedIn, what would be the best ways for our listeners to reach out and connect with you?
LinkedIn's great. I travel a bit, so sometimes there's a lag. So, but put something in there. I get quite a bit of spam, but I can usually tell the difference. And if I haven't responded, please give me a gentle nudge after, a week or two. It may just be, obviously I have quite a bit on my plate in my day job, and I love in my free time, evenings and weekends, doing all this connection with folks. And then again, congratulations to you, Dan. I say the connection, and opening some doors, you and your team, who I met, who are extraordinary, have earned each and every bit of it, and have grown and had such a positive impact in the AI Summit and all these other events that that is 100% all of you, just like Jessie and her business, right? Adding connection to expand opportunities. And I'd say that people like me, be an ally, like, whether it's women, diversity, innovation, the capital, the opportunities. The data shows that it's not a level playing field, and the only difference is connecting. I was part of the Women in Travel CIC program, and Mino's a female founder, and the difference of me being able to do some connections and add some credibility and simply enable everything that she's already worked hard to do. The difference of her success or failure wasn't based on product market fit or everything else. It was literally a couple intros that could have meant the difference between her getting into this accelerator program or not. She's done all the work, but as an ally, especially when women and diverse people aren't in the room, that aren't represented, give them voice, give them recognition, give them opportunity, understand in meetings when people don't speak up, ask them their opinion, right? That's part of leadership, is knowing that diverse teams outperform, and you're better off, with an environment where you can get the collective talents. Because again, our community, our guests, our leaders, our industry is diverse. And whether Harvard Business School, McKinsey, study after study shows empirically that diverse teams simply outperform. So that would be my last kind of exhortation, is help create connection, help unlock doors for people like me, be an ally actively, not just in our day job or what we need to do transactionally for our business, but more relationship and giving back. I think there's a famous quote, and I'll end on this, and Chip Conley often cites this, where, the purpose of life is to discover your gift. The work of life is to develop it, but the meaning of life is to give your gift away. So, and you don't have to be, have a hairline like mine to do that. You can do that at every stage and every age of your life and career, personally and professionally.
I was going to say, you're giving it all away with that hairline. Clearly, you're just
I'm getting there. I'm getting there. We're going to have, there we go.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. I have someone who's raised by a single mom and grew up in such a multicultural neighborhood in Toronto. I've always looked around the room in the meetings that I've been in, and always valued when I see that diversity. And unfortunately, we live in a time where all of a sudden there's a lot of pushback against that. I was in Europe just recently at ITB, and I just wanted to call this out because it's important not to just acknowledge your virtue signal. And I think that's one of the concerns people have. And I was meeting with people in Europe, and I was working on plans for the season. And a comment was made to me, "Oh, that's what you Americans care about." I'm obviously Canadian, but I understand the point was like that, that we're so concerned about trying to make sure we balance out these conversations and panels. In Europe, we don't care. It's just who's ever best for the conversation. And actually, I do think we're better for the diversity overall. I saw my good friend, Danny Guerrero, who runs a company called the Culturist Group. I learned so much from him as a gay Mexican to try and how to figure out how to market and to message. And it was like, he taught me so much. He runs this great PR company. And when I saw him, he said, it's been a really tough year because a lot of clients that were moving in the way of DEI have moved away from that. So you have continued to lead the charge. And that's why I said not only an ally for women, but also an advocate for diversity. Of course, you're based in San Francisco. You get the California perspective. But it's something I strongly advocate for. And I know, and I've seen seen you when we sat in a room together with 3 other male executives, and you said, I'm not going to record this podcast if there's not a female amongst us, or I'm going to acknowledge the fact that,
And a person of color. I'm part of supporting Ashley Johnson at Hospitality Hued and the Black hospitality community, people like Tracy Prigmore and others. It's to me, wherever the data, when the data shows that our industry reflects at all levels roughly the same proportions of the representation in our industry and the population at large, then I think, it doesn't mean you stop advocating or being a leader, but then you don't have the issue. And for those, I use the example of Mina who push back or say, like, Mina's earned it. This is about meritocracy. It's not about charity or about, people that aren't qualified, but it's also about, investing and recognizing that there are, structural, institutional, systemic constraints. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the data that shows, for example, women and people of color receive, less than 3%, even 2% of capital that, white men that look like me as founders do. And that's just in the startup world. So I think that's the thing. If we're intellectually honest, if we're fair, if we're caring, if we're equitable, and that means me giving up opportunities for myself sometimes. This isn't about, advocacy for its own sake or something that is, some people have defined it in that ways. It's absolutely about meritocracy. And it was a woman who said, talent is equally distributed, opportunity is not. And you just look at the data. And if somebody wants to tell me differently in the data, I'm going to call BS because they're not being intellectually honest.
Yeah, very well said, Stuart. And let's leave it there because I think that's a very poignant note to finish on. Obviously, I greatly appreciate you making the time for this and sharing your knowledge and advice, and I'm sure many people will reach out to you. I look forward to seeing you. We'll be at Focusrite Europe together a couple of months from now, so reach out to either of us if you're going to be at Focusrite Europe. I'll be recording there, of course. But yeah, continued success this year. Best to you and the Forbes Travel Guide team, and I look forward to seeing you or bumping into you on a plane somewhere around the world.
I was going to say, I'll see you next to me before I know it, only after a long trip on a return. But it's so good to see you, and thanks for the opportunity, Dan. Congrats on all your tremendous success with Travel Trends.
Thank you, Stuart. And thanks to all of our listeners who made time for this 3-part luxury hotel series, which was very much inspired by Stuart. So I'm thrilled you got a chance to meet him today, learn more about Forbes Travel Guide, the work that we've done with them over the last couple of years, and the summit, another big success for them this year, as you heard in episode 2 and now in episode 3 with Stuart. And it was obviously great to kick off this series with my good friend, Jonathan Raggett. So feel free to listen to these episodes in whatever order suits you best. But I do encourage you to listen to all 3 episodes and then give us feedback and suggestions on where we should head to next with hospitality. It's something that I'm, very passionate about, have a great interest in, and continue want to have these conversations. So comment, write back, send me an email, Dan at Travel Trends Podcast. And of course, this series wouldn't be possible unless we had the support from Guest OS and Jesse Fisher. And for those of you who are not familiar, over the course of these episodes, when we have a partner, they help cover the cost of production so we can have these conversations. And that's what Jesse and the team were kind enough to do with our luxury hospitality series. So if you're interested in having a multilingual AI concierge that handles guest calls, messages 24/7, can use your brand voice and can help with surfacing the kinds of experiences that will really make your property stand out, then you have to check out guestos.ai. Thanks again for joining us for this series. And until next week, safe travels.